set of pieces in front of people, and you do that over and over and over, it kind of gets rid of whatever trepidation you might have about being in front of people and doing that sort of thing.
Was there a moment when you sort of developed a next level confidence? You're like, wait, I'm pretty good at this. Or was it the writing that was doing?
I'm not sure. I will say, I don't think that it's ever good to develop next level confidence, meaning I think you got to prep for everything. Right. One of the things that I try to do is really over prepare for my show. If I'm going to have a debate or a discussion with somebody, I really try to dig in and get into what's true, what's not true. Right. I would much rather be over prepared. I think there's a certain level of insecurity that's good. Yeah. I think when you're overconfident, that's when you made mistakes. I think in my career, whenever I've made a mistake, it's typically because I didn't take a challenge seriously enough, or I sort of brushed it off. Yeah. And you see that happen a lot. People sort of rely on their native intelligence as opposed to assuming that you're not going to be the smartest person in the room all the time. Remember when I was in middle school, so I went to Walter Reed in North Hollywood, and they had a magnet school, like a highly gifted program. And I remember there was an IQ test, actually, kind of a rudimentary IQ test that was the baseline to get in. Right. And I got in, but I didn't get in by leaps and bounds. And we, I remember first day of class, everybody was kind of passing around their IQ scores and all this kind of stuff. And one girl had above 180, really, really, really high IQ. And I remember going back home and talking to my father about it. Yeah. He said, listen, you should assume that you're never the smartest person in the room, but you can always be the hardest working person in the room.
Love that.
And that I think has been sort of the motto.
I love it. So you went, UCLA undergrad. Here you are, 17, national syndicated columnist. A few years later, you got 2 published books about issues around the university. As you say, you may have been a step or 2 ahead of most in that respect. And then issues around, it was interesting, the porn industry, broadly defined.
Yeah, I was writing books about how the pornography industry was going to really carve out particularly young men's souls in about 2005. And at the time, people were saying, oh, this is crazy. What is he talking about? Now, of course, I think that there are a lot of young men who have fallen prey to that industry, who needs less family formation, less general happiness, less sex, actually. People who are kind of falling out of the social fabric that's necessary to build societies. I was calling that out in about 2005.
It's interesting. Even in my State of the State last week, I referenced just one of many different statistics, but roughly half of young men have never asked a woman out in person on a date. So your point and emphasis in that. And I want to unpack that a little bit later as well in the conversation. But you started then to not only identify yourself in the context of your intellectual pursuits and expressing your point of view through writing, also sort of gifted capacity to engage in debate and speech. But then you found Andrew Breitbart, who was out and about.
Not just gifted. Ben Shapiro is one of the most talented debaters and commentators in politics. That's without a doubt.
In Southern California, and you took a job there. Working at Breitbart.
That had been in 2012 during the 2012 election. I joined Breitbart. I'd known Andrew actually since my UCLA days. So I'd known him already for quite a number of years.
What do you think of Andrew? A lot of
Andrew's a kick. So I think that there's sort of you're in public life, so there's for a lot of people, there's sort of like the private person and there's the public person. They're not quite the same. So Andrew, the private person and the public person, were actually very much the same, I would say, up until the end. Toward the end, I think that Andrew became very frustrated with a lot of the political system, media coverage. But the truth is that Andrew was, for the vast majority of the time I knew him, very garrulous, willing to have conversations with nearly anyone. I think that if you talk to people who knew Andrew really well, their best memories of him are things like him just rollerblading in Venice and then just having like political conversations, taking somebody to coffee, like a random person. What I used to say to people about Andrew is that I knew Andrew for over a decade before he passed away. And if you knew Andrew for 5 minutes, you knew him about 95% as well as I did, because he was just very much there. Like he was just on the surface. Everything what you saw is what you got with Andrew. I joined Breitbart in about 2012. It was during the Romney-Obama election cycle. Right. I was there for a few years. I believe I ended up leaving in 2016, early 2016. Right. There had been some sort of career transitions there in which I was taking other jobs at the same time. There was a point, again, going under that sort of working hard rubric. There's one which I was working effectively 4 jobs. I was doing a morning show in LA where I interviewed you, actually. And then there was an afternoon show that I was doing in Seattle. So that was 6 hours of radio a day. I was the editor at large of Breitbart, which meant writing a piece or 2 a day for Breitbart. And then I had also taken a job as the editor-in-chief of a website called Truth Revolt for the David Horowitz Freedom Center. So I was working 4 jobs simultaneously. My advice to young people, particularly you want to be successful, say yes to doing everything, even if
Yeah, Elrich 2 today. I'm also thinking about doing some Final Fantasy 9 alternate fantasy mod. We're gonna
it's for
look into
free at the
that
beginning,
here
because
soon.
eventually saying yes a lot gets you the power to say no later on in your career when you can sort of winnow down what will make you successful.
And people, a lot of folks know this, but a lot of folks don't. Steve Bannon.
Alternate fantasy is a mod that adds like Beatrix into the permanent party roster for Final Fantasy 9. It's got a lot of changes, and it's also a difficulty increase, so I'm excited to check into it.
Was down there working for Breitbart at the time. You guys got along initially,
I know.
even in the beginning.
Steve is not the easiest person to get along with. I will say that.
We'll talk a little bit more just briefly. I don't want to over index with Steve, but so you left in 2016, but in 2015 you more formally established what more commonly is identified with the Daily Caller, right? I mean, it was
Daily Wire. Right. So Daily Wire we established formally in
2015, right?
So it would have been in the middle of the primary. So it would have been 2016.
Yeah.
That's when we formally launched, was a few months before the election of 2016. I'd been working at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. It was kind of a funny story there where we had Jeremy Boring and I, who were business partners. He had been working there. And he basically hit upon what was a social media arbitrage plan. He basically saw that you could market on social media in new ways, and that would bring you traffic. And we proposed this to the board. They legitimately did not understand what we were talking about, because boards of nonprofits are famously, sort of elderly and non-tech involved. And so we made a presentation. Jeremy was kind of fondly known as the stupid whisperer, because we'd met with many Congress people, and I speak quickly, and Jeremy spoke slowly with a Southern accent. Right. And so he would very often, get across better to those Congress people who shall remain unnamed. Anyway, we met with the board. Jeremy sort of explained the marketing plan. They had no idea what he was talking about. They turned to me and they said, "Ben, can you explain the marketing plan?" I said, "Sure."
He's so much smarter than Gavin. This can't go well for the governor. Yeah, I mean, listen.
Very easy. I was frustrated by this point, so I took out a napkin and I wrote on it.
Let's look at the chapters. Are podcast influence overrated? Oh, that's interesting.
What do you make
Policy.
What do you make of the current media landscape? I mean, it seems to be the sort of dialectic between the old and the new, sort of the digital first.
No worries, Sid.
And these legacy media companies. I mean, obviously podcasts becoming at least part of the it's a conversation. I don't know. We can get into the merits demerits of overstating, over-indexing podcast influence. But so much of what you seeded and influenced in terms of the right-wing media, even in now in some respects, what folks are trying to replicate with more progressive media voices. What do you make of the landscape today? How would you describe the current landscape?
I mean, it's highly fragmented. I think in some ways that's good. I think in some ways that's bad. It's had tremendous benefits in the sense that you don't have 3 networks and you have to rely on just those 3 networks. You can in real time fact check things. It's bad in the sense that while gatekeeping is difficult and obviously can silo off information that you need to have, if you have people who are algorithmically driven, who are desperate for clicks and desperate for attention and don't seem to care very much about the truth, and if there's kind of no pushback, then bad information can spin its way around very, very quickly. And it doesn't take long for people to draw extremely hard narratives about, I would say, convoluted sets of facts.
Yep.
And I think that, frankly, politicians sometimes have a position in doing this, because if you're catering to a base, and obviously, listen, everybody has to be aware of audience capture. In my industry, in politics, you have to be very aware of audience capture because you need to win votes. But I mean, just to take as a recent example, what happened in Minneapolis, I think that the normie response to what happened in Minneapolis is, this is obviously a tragedy from a sort of legal perspective. Putting on my lawyer hat, the intent of Renee Good is not relevant to the question of the intent of the officer, right? If you're gonna prosecute the officer, then you'd have to determine whether an objective, reasonable officer would have perceived that he was being threatened by her vehicle when he shot her. And it seems to me that you could voice a fairly strong defense in a court of law that an objectively reasonable officer, since he actually was nudged with the car at the very least, would have perceived it that way. Now, this immediately broke down into two separate narratives, both of which I think are untrue. One was a narrative that was immediately pushed by the Trump administration and Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, that she was a domestic terrorist who was attempting to run over officers with her car and was legitimately trying, not just this officer, but multiple officers. That was the original statement. I said at the time, I thought that was untrue. And then your press office tweeted out that it was state-sponsored terrorism, which, I mean, Governor, I do have to ask you about that. That sort of thing makes our politics worse.
Yeah.
I mean, it does. I mean, our ICE officers obviously are not terrorists. A tragic situation is not state-sponsored terrorism.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I mean, when it comes to ICE, I mean, I'll ask you this just generally about policy with regard to ICE, because obviously it's become incredibly contentious given what the federal government is doing in states like California. You know, it seems to me that there have been a number of deportations from red states, right, where there are governors and localities working with ICE. California is a sanctuary state, which makes it much more difficult for local law enforcement to hand over information to ICE about deportation status. What's the purpose of that? Wouldn't best policy, you're pragmatic, you talk about your pragmatism all the time, wouldn't best policy be to cooperate with ICE in the vast majority of cases? So instead of ICE going to, as you say, hospitals and churches to pick people up, they'd be going to jailhouses to pick people up.
That's exactly what they do in California. And we have over 10,000 that I've cooperated with since I've been governor of California. We work very directly with ICE as it relates to CDCR, our state prison. California has cooperated with more ICE transfers probably than any other state in the country. And I vetoed multiple pieces of legislation that have come from my legislature to stop the ability for the state of California to do that. So when it comes to the issues of violent criminals, when it comes to felons, people that are being released from the largest state system in the United States of America, California cooperates with ICE.
Okay, but why is it then, what makes it a sanctuary state?
Well, the broader sanctuary policies that are established, and we had a policy that was established under Governor Brown, SB 54. You have city sanctuary policies that go back quite literally to the time Ronald Reagan was governor, as relates to some of the issues in Central America, sort of the origin stories. But at bottom line, as it relates to those policies, this notion that federal law should be enforced by federal law enforcement agencies, that we should not consign local law enforcement to federal responsibilities and prioritization.
Right, but shouldn't the state step in with localities and tell localities that they ought to cooperate better with ICE, thus to facilitate?
Well, I have sort of Rudy Giuliani's point of view, who made the point as an advocate for sanctuary policy when he was mayor of New York. He said it keeps people safer, healthier, and more educated. Safer in the context that it allows community members to be more likely to participate as witnesses of crime or victims of crime in going after the perpetrators, more likely to get an immunization shot if they're not worried about the nurse turning them over to ICE.
He's right, and Rudy Giuliani was right when he said that. Here's the difference, though. It does not mean and should not mean that you don't cooperate with ICE. And he's saying that they do, but we've already heard several stories where jails are releasing prisoners that are felons, violent criminals, etc., like from the jails, and then ICE can't get it. Like, we already know that has happened.
More likely to go to school and get educated if they're not worried about the school crossing guard crossing them and ultimately turning them over to ICE. So it's the tool of pragmatism because of the
Welcome back, Sid.
complete abject failure of the federal government. A sanctuary policy is unnecessary if we had comprehensive immigration reform and we had a federal response that was adequate to the task. But in the absence of that, it's grown from the 70s and 80s and 90s, 2000s. And obviously I got here as governor and we had an established framework before I got here.
But it is true that sanctuary policy obviously has had a massive impact as a driver of tremendous number of illegal immigrants in the state of California.
I don't know about that. I mean, you see in a lot of states that don't have sanctuary policies, huge increase in immigration, illegal immigration, massive increases, even far greater than the state of California. Just look as an example. But in terms of
the cost structure, I mean, you recently, for example, had to freeze the enrollment of undocumented immigrants in state health systems to save money, right? I mean, these are major burdens. No,
that's a separate issue. There are 12 states that provide health care for undocs, and we believe in universal health care regardless of pre-existing conditions.
My only point is that the cost structure is extraordinarily burdensome.
But I don't think it's in unpacking it. I don't think it's the sanctuary policies that are driving that. And I'll give you a proof point. Florida doesn't have sanctuary policy, huge increase in undocumented community. Huge increase in Texas. It's not a driver, their sanctuary policies. They don't have sanctuary policies in those states. The state of California's policies, I don't think in that respect, have invited people into our state. And I use those as, I think, proof points of that. And that's a different. So the notion of how do you deal with people that are here 10, 15 years? How do you deal with mixed status families in the state? And how do you provide for health care as opposed to emergency care and stabilize population?
Undocumented illegal immigrants getting on welfare, state-funded, taxpayer-funded welfare is unfucking acceptable.
And community health. It's a different approach. It's one that we've been.
Americans only. People, this is just, you cannot burden the system like that.
Very transparent about it. It's one that's hardly unique because in every state they provide
this is just a matter of
compensated
logic
care for undocs
and
at
numbers.
the emergency room. Many states provide it for children, many for seniors. California provides it across the board.
I mean, the biggest problem, though, as somebody who left the state, is that the cost structure in the state has become so burdensome, not just because of illegal immigration, but generally. And so the idea that policy has no impact as a magnet for particular human behavior or alienating people from a state, that's clearly untrue.
Yeah,
and when you look at the homeless population, for example, friendlier policies toward providing services in Santa Monica
Separate
led to
point, though. But now you're getting a homeless policy, not immigration policy.
No, but
I
if we want to stick
back
with immigration policy,
No,
if you make it easier for illegal immigrants,
But let's stick with immigration
not to
policy.
avoid ICE, then presumably.
No, look, I appreciate this. So we've established an important. I appreciate the question because I'm glad we've established that we do cooperate with ICE in California. In particular, this governor, who's, as I said, on multiple occasions vetoed efforts to stop me from that coordination for dangerous criminals, and we've done that over 10,000 folks.
So it'd be wrong for. So when AOC said this week that ICE should be abolished, you disagree?
Oh, I disagree. When I think a candidate for president by the name of Harris said that in the last campaign, I came out. I remember being on Chris Hayes hours later saying I think that's a mistake. So absolutely. Number two, as it relates to the issue of sanctuary policy, I think it's important to establish because it's not well established. Sanctuary jurisdictions have lower crime rates than non-sanctuary jurisdictions. So this notion that it somehow increases crime is also, I think, contradicted on the basis of the facts. So this notion that population, it becomes an attractive nature for population increases, I think is contradicted by the facts. As it relates to crime, it's contradicted by the facts, but there's unquestionably, and you're right about this, as it relates to an expansion of services, but not just for sanctuary jurisdictions, for population, diverse populations. Yes, there are states like California that have chosen a different approach.
And that approach, I mean, means that when you came into office, for example, the budget was, what, $200 billion? And your proposed budget last year or this year is $350 billion. You went from a surplus.
The general fund's $248 billion. We have $42.3 billion additional revenue structure than we anticipated. By the way, another 2.8 came in December. And California is now replenishing its reserves, $23 billion, paying down pension obligations, $11.8 billion. There's no question there are cost pressures as it relates to Medicaid, and Medi-Cal in California.
Wow.
And those pressures are going to be made worse
That shit happens here in England too. Yeah, I know.
because of the big, beautiful bill.
Well, I mean, I think that the main pressures in the state of California in terms of kind of future costs looks like some of the programs that you mentioned, mainly if we're going to look at.
What was it? What's the main Pakistani immigrants, I think, is the primary influx. We have Mexicans and others, smaller minorities of all kinds, and the numbers are astounding. But honestly, I think it might be worse for UK because the thing is, like, you guys have such a small land area, a smaller population. And when you have like millions and millions of people coming in over small boats across the English Channel, the burden on your taxpayer base must be astounding, just unmeasurable. Like, just like you can't even. And how do you track it all? And it's because it's astronomically bad here. But Sid, I can't imagine how catastrophic it's going to be for you guys if they don't fucking shape up. Like, I really worry about the UK a lot. I really do, man. And it's the highest numbers in terms of arrests and jailing for social media posts, etc. It's
At it, CalPERS, CalSTARS, the
UK.
fact
UK is, oh, they're literally crying and begging for help right now.
that you have perhaps $500 billion in unfunded liabilities going forward.
Well, which we've substantially improved in the last 7 years. I just mentioned the $11.8 billion commitment. We've highlighted that in the State of the State to pay down long-term pension obligations. STRS and PERS, their funded liability has been improving over the last 5 or 6 years. Can make up for the last 30 years. You may recall a decade plus ago, we did reforms for new employees moving in. We dealt with spiking and other issues and abuses in that space. We're hardly unique in this country as it relates to unfunded liability,
or fraud issues, obviously,
and fraud issues. We can talk about fraud all day. I'd love to talk about that, and we could get back to that because I think it's an incredibly important topic. And California has been actually out front on a lot of these anti-fraud efforts, and I think there's a lot of BS in this space as it relates to sort of targeted assaults and offense that obviously are penny politics. But I want to go back because we're going to get all of this. I know everyone came here for all this stuff.
Of course. Before we do, I just want to ask, there's sort of a general take that I have, and that is, so I heard the podcast that you did with Ezra Klein. I think Ezra is wonderful. He and I disagree about nearly everything, and I think Ezra is really, really a fascinating person with a lot of really interesting and heterodox ideas. And he talked with you a lot about sort of governance, and you talked with him a lot about how you were trying to remove regulatory barriers to, for example, building units, right? Because when you came into office, you wanted to build, I believe it was 3.5 million units.
That was the stated need,
right?
Then we created a legal framework of 2.5 million,
and it will come up way short of that. But it's like 2030. And what is it? About 150,000 units that are being created.
Little less than 150,000. You're right, about 111, 108,000.
And this isn't a rip on you. I mean, because
it's been a major national issue, and the macroeconomics of this with interest rate environment, sort of post-COVID environment, made this housing crisis across the country.
Although to be fair, the housing crisis in California is particularly bad. I mean, there are places like Phoenix or Austin or there's
the original. I said yesterday or last week in the State of States, the original sin, our inability to get out of our own way on all the regulatory thickets.
Right. So
we blew through those in the last couple of years. 61 housing reform bills we just passed, and Ezra was highlighting that. Interesting.
Yes.
New York just moved in a direction. I think finally we Democrats broadly are moving now finally in the right direction after decades and decades. Democrats and Republicans in California neglect in this space.
Right. And I think that one of the problems that people see, and there's been a big question, you've asked it, you've talked about it a lot actually, about the frustration that people have with politics and the disenchantment that people have and the feeling that no matter what they do, they can't get ahead. And that's manifesting in a lot of political polarization. And this gets to, I think, a sort of broader issue. It's not just you. So I don't mean this to be a specific critique of you. I think it's a critique of a lot of politicians that I have left and right. Yeah. And that is, you look at the system, you realize as the governor how complex the system is, how difficult it is to get things done, how much gridlock there is in the system. But politicians, in order to get elected, have to make a lot of promises about how much things are going to change in the future.
Yep.
And they usually are talking about using the power of government in order to facilitate and make that change happen, particularly on the Democratic side of the aisle. And it seems to me that that is a recipe for disaster for the American body politic, because if you make promises that cannot be fulfilled because the system does not allow for it to be fulfilled, people inherently end up frustrated. And, I have relatives who still live in the state of California. I visit it routinely, and they're making a very good living. Right? I have a sister-in-law and brother-in-law who live in LA. They make a combined excellent living, and they're barely making their mortgage. And the housing costs are too high. The cost of living is too high. I believe the poverty rates in California on a cost adjusted basis are some of the highest in the nation.
Right there with Florida, correct. When you look at the supplemental poverty index, when you look at poverty broadly defined, it's slightly above average. Supplemental, Florida and California, right
If you're looking at real estate costs in particular are extraordinary in the state of California. And as you say, you're trying to remove regulations, but the problem is that unless we are willing to recognize a fundamental reality, which is that the relationship
this is where, okay, let's hear him out here,
of the American people with their government needs to change.
Oh, I agree with that.
And what that means is that we need to radically remove the regulatory structures that allow for more building, that we need to radically stop perverting markets when it comes to how we make housing policy. That we need to stop wasting money in taxpayer funding on things like, for example, a gigantic, you once called it a boondoggle, high-speed rail that is going to cost in excess of $100 billion in this state.
Right.
You know, the guarantee, and again, I see it rising on the populist right too, which is sort of a big government right, which is something I object to on a sort of classically conservative level. The promises that are made that if you give government more power and more taxpayer revenue, that suddenly these problems are going to be alleviated. And the actual result, which is less ability to do what my parents did, to move from a 2-bedroom small house in Burbank to a 4-bedroom, slightly larger house in North Hollywood. And then for me to go to a great state school like UCLA, and then for me to go to Harvard Law School, and now to have a really, really nice house. You know, I did have a nice house in California before we left, obviously. You know, those obstacles need to be
Well, you sound like me. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we can get high-speed rail aside. You made my
high-speed rail aside, even though that's one of the biggest wasteful spending projects in the state, if not the biggest.
My speech and my argument the last 3 years in terms of the housing reforms we pursued. Could not agree more. I highlighted this.
Let's just ignore the biggest waste of money that has ever occurred in any state ever. So set that aside, and it's not that bad when you look at it. It's still bad if you ignore the worst waste of money ever. It's not that bad.
61 bills just
Like, what kind of logic? It's so insane.
last year. I didn't highlight the 42 CEQA reform bills, the original, talk about process and regulatory thickets, those environmental rules that were established ironically by Ronald Reagan himself when he was governor of California. So we've been in the process of doing precisely what you're suggesting we need to do. And we've been doing it very meaningfully and been nation leading reforms in this space. Now, of course, the private sector needs to
Established by, but not inflated and blown up by Ronald Reagan. The thing is the Democrats have inflated and bloated those agencies and bureaucratic groups to overwhelming and untenable sizes.
catch up in the context of interest rate environment becoming more favorable. But now we are cities and counties we put on notice. May you recall when I first became governor, I sued Huntington Beach, the first city, because they were out of compliance with their housing element. We established a legally binding goal of 2.5 million units. We talked about the stretch goal, what needed to get some equilibrium in our prices, the supply-demand imbalance, but we created a legally binding goal of 2.5 million.
So what could be done to make that happen in not Huntington Beach, but LA, San Francisco?
We created a housing accountability unit. We pursued 46 actions. We've unlocked
right, but I guess the question is from like the common man perspective, right? From my perspective, where I left, I took my business, right? From that perspective, how do we get to the material change? And if we cannot, then perhaps that requires a complete rethink. Now, come over to my classical libertarian economics here, Governor, is I guess what I'm saying, and maybe
libertarian economics is, it's the best kind of economics that makes the most money, it just provides a lot of prosperity across the board.
Recognize that the amount of tax revenue,
everyone levels up. It's like a boss fight. You get libertarian economics policies in there, and it's like a big boss fight with a big old fat drop of XP that everybody levels up in.
That's taken in the state perverts the market incentives. That what's been generated in the state is a middle class that is really struggling. Vast social services for people who are at poverty line or below and slightly above, and then a group of people who are either so wealthy they don't care, or so wealthy now they're leaving, right, because of the prospective wealth tax, which I know you oppose, right? You understand markets, so that's why I'm always a little bit bewildered when there are measures taken by the state legislature that end up perverting markets in fairly serious ways.
Well, we can get into the crony capitalism, state capitalism, and the tithings from NVIDIA and AMD and what's going on with Intel and what's happening with the Trump administration in that respect. But I agree with you broadly in all this. I mean, the fact is we've been tackling all. I can't make up for 50, 60 years. And you're talking about literally a 50-year trend line as it relates to the issues of cost of housing affordability. But I can talk in terms of the substantive actions we've taken, tripling their income tax credits for working families, creating a child tax credit, foster tax credit, doing more as it relates to pre-distribution opportunities.
How about radically lowering the income tax rates in the state?
Well, California has tax. I mean, there's 16 states right now. Let's talk about those 16 states.
Why don't we talk about California? That's
well, I'm going to that tax their low wage earners more than California taxes its high wage earners. Let's talk about those lowering those tax rates in those 16 states. How about the middle class? 40% of the middle class in Texas pay higher taxes than they do in California. We have the highest tax rate for the 1%. But the overall tax burden, and there's been independent analysis after independent analysis, is marginally higher than the national average.
Okay.
So the tax rate for the 1%, you're in that bubble. But 99% empirically are not.
As a person who grew up in California and spent my entire career in California, I paid every single tax rate in the state of California. And I started off making, when I first got out of school and I'd quit the law firm, I was making maybe $60,000 a year.
So you started out paying less than you would in a dozen plus other states.
And I didn't.
It's a progressive tax state.
I understand it's a progressive tax state. The problem is that when I left, I also took 80 employees. And there's somebody who's got to pay the bills for those employees, and that's typically not the state. The person who is paying the bills for the employees, and the person
as the guy who's created. By the way, you're talking to a guy who started right out of college, pen to paper, and started 23 small businesses. Literally 23. Created almost 1,000 jobs.
So you know, as a person who ran a small business, you wanted to pay salaries to your people.
Honored.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, it's not about the greed of the one person. I'm the same person.
I hated a lot of the regulations, and I've been fighting against a lot of those.
And having to fire people because of that stuff is awful.
I agree.
And losing your profit margin, which allows you to hire more people, is a bad thing. And when you're seeing, I mean, I've talked to major tech founders who say today that they would not, if they had to do it over again, they would not found in California, specifically because of the regulatory and tax structure.
Well, let's talk about the largest startup in world history. Could have chosen any place to open its headquarters. Just recently, OpenAI and the folks there decided to open in San Francisco. I mean, it runs.
That's where the talent is. I mean, there's no question.
Therein lies the formula for success. California has more Fortune 500 companies than it's ever had in 20 plus years.
To be fair, you have 40 million people who live here.
Well, hold on. But 4 years ago, that wasn't the case. Today, it's the case. We have 58 Fortune 500 companies. When I started, it was 49.
People move there because the weather's nice. It's the most perfect weather, I think, in the world. And you don't have to, companies don't have to worry about logistics like snow or sandstorms or hurricanes. Earthquakes, sure, but they're so rare. And they've built standards in to protect pretty much indefinitely against that, unless we get like a 9-pointer, right? 8-pointer, or God forbid, 9.9, some insane thing.
Sixth largest economy. Now we're the fourth largest economy. You look at the 3.1 million jobs that have been created since I've been governor. You can look across the spectrum. I'm not denying its challenges, but those persist and exist in every other state. You move to a state that has higher insurance rate, higher car insurance, not just home insurance, has higher property taxes. Many of these red states, they have higher murder rates, lower wages, lower productivity, less innovation and entrepreneurialism. They're less contributory to the GDP of this country.
So, I mean, not to defend my current state, Florida. I mean, obviously you had a debate with Governor DeSantis where you guys had this discussion. But I will say that some of the statistics that you use with regard to California are aggregate statistics, not on a per capita basis. So I've heard you say, for example, that that California is the top innovation state because it has the highest number of new businesses founded. On a per capita basis, that isn't true. You've said
How about on a per capita basis, more Floridians move into California than Californians to Florida?
I mean, that's
per capita basis.
That's fine. And on absolute,
okay, I just want to let's establish the per capita per capita murder rate. Let's look at infant mortality per capita.
Well, we can look at violent assault rates. We can look at property crime rates.
I don't know,
but it's not.
I mean, Jacksonville versus San Francisco.
California, outside of immigration, has had a net loss of population for the past several years.
But immigration is part of the secret sauce of California going back to its origins.
I understand, but if you lose people like me and the 80 employees I took with me and members of my family,
I'm not happy about anyone leaving the state, but population's grown 3 years in a row. Last time it declined, it went down with 11 other states, and we lost 151 people.
If you're talking not about immigration.
The all-in podcasters, for example, Jason Calacanis, Chamath Palpatina, David Sachs and David Freeberg have a lot more employees. I mean, their empires pay for a hell of a lot more employees than Ben Shapiro. They've all left.
If you're just talking about
They all left California.
people who lived in California who are leaving, that number is high. And,
Well,
and again, I'm not blaming that on you
It could
because
be the case in many, many states, as you know, across this country. By the
100%.
way, a lot of red states, which I'm surprised you guys don't talk more about. What about the last few years, all these red states losing folks? California hasn't been the last few years. These red states are Louisiana, Mississippi. Let's talk about those states.
Well,
Let's talk about the murder rate. Adding to the top 10 murder rates in America are in red states. I think there's some real problems. The most regressive taxes in the country are in these red states. Who are you for?
I mean, the question really, again, you're the governor of California, not the governor of Louisiana. If I'm speaking with the governor of Louisiana, I'd be very happy to talk about.
I just never hear
Louisiana.
anyone talk about the governor of Louisiana and the population declines.
Yeah, because last I'm aware, the governor of Louisiana, probably wasn't running for president, and also doesn't.
I don't know. Who knows? Everyone else seems to be running for
Also,
president.
I never lived in
When are you
Louisiana.
running for president? By the way, let's get back to that. Bannon is running for president. He said.
Oh goodness.
You don't buy that?
No, I bet that Steve would run a vanity campaign in order to garner a few dollars and some more attention for himself. Sure, why not?
I'm gonna get back to all the California bashing here in a second because I know
Steve Bannon will never win a presidential race, but
everyone wants to tune in on that. But I want to keep going a little bit, and just in the interest of you coming all the way out from that red state of Florida, because it is interesting, just in terms of just as you laid out the framework of the media environment in this country, and how fragmented it's become, et cetera. This notion of trust and truth, and how things are weaponized, and how everybody, society becomes how we behave, and how you indicted a little bit my press office, which I appreciated the direct point you made on that. And I'm not naive about that. I think about that all the time. When we put up a mirror to Trump, we become more like him.
Yeah, well, I just don't. I mean, Gavin Newsom says just as anything inflammatory Donald Trump has ever said, and there's some things that I'm like, I really cringe. Gavin Newsom's done just as much. Come on, what are we talking
complicit in that?
Not unique to you.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've had things at our company that have been said. That's not unique. I will say that I think that for elected politicians who are hoping for a better future where we all come together, it is a problem. And, I don't like the catastrophism. I've criticized it on the right too. The sort of catastrophism that you see in a functioning democracy, which is what the United States is. It is a functioning republic. For example, when the president decided to push for redistricting and then you push back with your proposition, I actually didn't have a problem with that. I thought, that is a normal use of the political mechanisms in order to fight back by one side against another. What I do have a problem with is if you go on Stephen Colbert and say you're worried there won't be a legit election in 2028.
But I feel that. I mean, if I believe that.
Do you really believe that?
I really believe that.
But then why are you running? Or why would you consider running?
I want to make sure because we have agency, we can shape the future. It's not something to experience.
But I didn't believe it when President Trump said it. So President Trump said in 2020.
I think I believe in it. But he tried
to. You truly believe that President Trump is going to try to run in 2028?
No, I believe that he'll try to wire the outcome in 2028. I really believe that.
This sort of stuff is very dangerous to me. I heard it from the right in the aftermath of 2020. And you'll recall I was one of the few on the right who said this is not true. Right, that Joe Biden was legitimately elected in 2020, and that if someone could provide me evidence that he was not, that was sufficient to overcome the burden of proof.
What Trump tried to do.
Well, I mean, what is the thing that you think?
He's dialing up for 12,000 votes in Georgia. He ended up pardoning. I mean, where you support
I'm not justifying.
Try to light democracy.
I'm not justifying what he said to Brad Raffensperger over in Georgia.
Yeah,
Brad Raffensperger, by the way, did the right thing. I think Mike Pence did the right thing, by the way, in certifying the election. But my point is that when it comes to, if you want the country to continue to work together, then if you set the predicate, if I lose, it was rigged, and this is true for either side.
I can't stand that.
Then we need some objective metrics.
With you on that.
Then if you're going to say that, we need some objective metrics by which we can adjudicate whether or not.
Which is the argument for ID. Voter ID. It is the simplest concept.
The election will be fairly decided, and it seems to me that just in terms of how elections are conducted globally, and again, I'm in favor of many of these sort of election reforms that have been proposed, for example, voter ID. I think it's kind of silly to argue that you shouldn't have to show ID when you vote. But do I think that we are at high risk in the United States of full-scale national elections with 150 million voters being stolen and that the elective leadership is then fundamentally illegitimate, which leaves you with no choice, presumably, but to go to the mattresses, which is what you don't want.
No,
like that sort of language, I think, is really, really
and I don't
dangerous.
see it on. But back to the point you were making earlier about the aggregate, we're talking about a few thousand votes here and there that ultimately determine that election for the nation on the basis of the electoral map. So I think it's more prone to concern than you may suggest.
But I think
that concern, by the
pointing
way,
out specific problems so that we can actually agree on the specific
oh,
solutions.
I'm with you, and
that's
that's why I'm calling it out now. And I try to provide evidence to back up my point as it relates to the Department of Justice and how it gets weaponized. And I've seen it from my party as well. Sure as hell seen it from Trump's perspective. What they try to do with the BORTAC teams on the day of the election here under Prop 50, where they send folks out and these guys all dressed up to try to chill free expression and free speech on election day, where Trump tweets out that morning saying this is a rigged election. The fact that he's out there suggesting that all the vote by mail is illegal and a bunch of illegal immigrants.
We could do whataboutism all day, but like we're talking about stuff, like we're talking about moving on. What do we do from here to avoid that?
Are out there doing all of these things. You start stacking them, including trying to rig midterm elections as it relates to changing the maps and what he tried to do on January 6th. Yeah, I start getting a little bit concerned.
I don't want to lump all those
things
in together because I don't think they're all the same.
They're not all the same, but they stack together from my perspective. It's not one action. It's a sum total of all of those things, including sending out ICE.
But it's very difficult to argue. But it's very difficult to argue.
Here's
the thing. It's very difficult to argue over intentions because now I'm in the business of mind reading, which I can't do. Well,
Trump's not. He's telling you what he thinks.
I know, and I will
so
criticize him
when
he says what he thinks. I'll criticize. So, for example, when he said 2020 was a rigged election, he said, you'll recall, in 2020, on the night of the election, he said, I won before all the results were in. I came out before anybody, and I said, that's wrong. The election is not over yet. All the votes have not been counted.
Good
right.
For you.
So I tried to. I try, and I think the responsible thing to do is, and I don't always do this, but I think that the responsible thing to do is to try and hone in on the specific behavior. So, you mentioned that it would be election rigging, if President Trump is pushing for gerrymandering in Indiana. I don't think that's election rigging. I don't think it's election rigging when you gerrymander in California. I think that is a long practice part of American politics. Yeah. And I don't think that you did anything wrong, actually, in pushing for it in California, as much as it does not benefit the party that I tend to vote for, right, and of whom I'm a member, of which I'm a member. So, when the general tenor, and this is what I see in democratic crises that you see around the world, one of the things that I see is both sides saying, if the other side wins, it was rigged.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, though. I'll double down on being crystal clear. I can't stand that any more than you can stand that. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm concerned about the inputs between now and 2028. Including concerned about folks that well, Steve Bannon and others, saying there'll be a third Trump term. The fact that I was in the
I think Steve's totally full of shit. And by the way, I think that people should stop giving Steve attention for saying things that are complete horseshit.
And I appreciate that. But should I give attention to Donald Trump when I sat there in the Oval Office for 90 minutes and he tells me to turn around and there's a picture on the wall or painting on the wall of FDR, and I look at him and I smile and I said, oh, here's the third term. He goes, what about 4 terms? Should I take him seriously?
Okay, so
should I take him literally?
I will say,
I don't know. I'm just a question.
I know, and my general
That's
answer,
the president.
And my general answer to this is, if we've watched Donald Trump for 10 years.
Like, I know what Ben's going to say here, but he's obviously joking when Trump does that. To Gavin Newscum, of all people, he's joking, trying to get a rise out of him. That's what Donald Trump does.
10 years, and we're still doing the thing where we all take him explicitly literally. I think that
Maduro did.
So people
or has.
Okay, it turns out Maduro should have. But one of the things that I remember I would get this critique about President Trump a lot is President Trump, who, as I've said multiple times, on his epitaph, it will read 45th and 47th President of the United States. He said a lot of shit. Like the thing
I'm not going to pretend. I take my presidents a little more seriously than most.
I don't think you do. And this is the thing where I really doubt it. I see a lot of people who Trump will fire off a random tweet, and everybody kind of laughs because it's President Trump. If I'm going to pretend that is coming from the same thought process as whatever comes from Joe Biden's press office, which went through 7 layers and maybe not the president.
Very different.
Then I'm not gonna pretend that's the same thing because I'm not an idiot.
And that's look. And by the way,
that's just the bare minimum. the bare minimum. If you're being honest, that's the bare
I
minimum.
could not agree even more, and that's, I think, reflected in the humor I'm trying to put back in on my social
Right.
media.
And actually,
when we're
I think it's
pushing
kind of a
back on
problem
it.
for you because I think that, frankly, the stuff that you're doing is more thought out than the stuff that President Trump does. Meaning, I think that President Trump is waking up at 3 a.m. if he went to sleep at all,
If he
and he's
went to
firing off stuff on Truth Social, right? And so, am I supposed to take that as seriously as you, in a methodical fashion, saying, you know what, I'm going to prank him back? And I think that people people who are your supporters do take you in that way more literally than they would be apt to take President Trump.
I mean, a lot of my supporters have been offended by by what we're trying to do, but no, look, and a lot, I think, appreciate the humor that we bring to it, and I do think I think it's reflected in I think a sense of agreement that we have in that respect as it relates to what Trump puts out all the time. But
like, if you win the 2028 election, I will call you president of the United States, right? Because that election will be legitimate, and if it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio or whoever else,
as I was, as an American, I called Donald Trump president of the United States, Mr. President. I mean, of course, and so I'm with you on that.
Yes.
On the outcome, but that doesn't suggest that I believe for a second, and you haven't respectfully convinced me that I'm wrong or errant, that he won't do everything in his power to manipulate the outcome.
To manipulate the outcome. You mean that he won't do everything in his power to ensure that a side that is a successor to his wins? Of course he will. So will Gavin Newsom. So has every president that has ever sat on in at the in the Oval Office. That's just the way it is. Like, that's the way it works. Manipulation is a funny term because I recall a certain Hunter Biden laptop that was suppressed by the media and the previously progressive owned Twitter that manipulated the outcome of 2020 big time. Had a huge massive effect.
Do I expect?
Do I think it would have overturned it? Probably not.
I think it's time of life. If he was 20 years younger, I absolutely believe he'd run for a third term. But his time of life suggests that that's not going to be the case. But I do think he's going to try to hardwire.
This also implicates. You see the reason I'm concerned about this, because it also implicates the guardrails. So, as you've talked about in your state, there's a lot of gridlock, right? There are a lot of various moving parts. When you're trying to get something done at the state level, you've got local governments that can impede you. You've got a legislature that can say no to you, right? You've got a bunch of it. You've got a judiciary that will tell you no in certain areas. There was a ruling a couple of weeks ago that I strongly agree with from the judiciary with regard to, for example, school districts and what they can and should tell parents about their kids.
That's going to be thrown out, but we'll get to that.
But
when Benitez decision,
but when it comes to what President Trump is or is not trying to do, the problem is when we say that he will try to steal the election. Will the election be stolen? That relies now on an opinion about, for example, the Supreme Court of the United States, or an opinion about the various state legislatures and courts. And so now you're not just implicating what President Trump might try to do, you're now implicating pretty much every major institution that is electoral in nature in the country.
There's a lot of evidence, and I know both sides have argued a lot of evidence as it relates to the weaponization of justice and the bias that's expressed in a lot of these.
Well, the weaponization of justice has only occurred on one side. It's the Democrats, since when they did all the bullshit trumped up charges they did on Donald Trump after he lost the election in 2019. Federal
judicial opinions, and it's it's a little alarming. I mean, as a father of a judge who reveres the courts, and as someone that I was very proud. My father may have been accused of being an activist judge, but he in many occasions calling balls and strikes, and I revere that sense of justice. That's where justice is found, with an objective analysis. But no, I do worry about the Supreme Court. You may not. I'm concerned about the Supreme Court of the United States. I'm concerned about what Donald Trump did after January 6th, the degree that he went to ultimately try to stay into office. Yes, I'm concerned about the actions he's taken, not any one of them from the midterm redistricting, but the sum total of many of them. And yes, I'm concerned if we don't take back the House of Representatives and we have no oversight and we continue to have the supine Congress, we may not have a country that we recognize. I really believe that. I do.
And it's fine to believe all of those things. I will say that to articulate them as though they are all of equal levels of alarm, or that the sum total of them is that if we don't win the next election, the country's over, which again is something that you hear very often from the right too. I think that sort of alarmism.
BS. No, you're not, Gavin. You're just sensationalizing. He is. He is. All right, let's move on to the next. Oh, TPUSA.
Let me go back to some of the disagreements, and I don't want to paint too much and color this in because as a Democrat, it's in my interest to do so. But you got a lot of attention for going recently to America Fest, Turning Point USA. You made a terrible decision of being the first speaker. That's just me saying editorially. What the heck were you thinking?
That is not my decision, right?
No,
they invited me. They gave me a slot. That's
yeah, just your luck, because then every speaker can come on and
that's
and
okay.
attack what
I got
say.
to say what I wanted to say, and then
So
I
paint the
said
picture.
pretty much,
What did you say?
sure.
So people tuning in don't know what the hell we're talking about. You went in and
Yeah, the problem is Tucker Carlson was invited to that as well and just bashed Ben Shapiro left and right because Tucker is an absolute moron.
a pretty somber time. Charlie's widow was there. You had a lot of, the sort of branded celebrities in the right, and Candace Owens was there. And
Candace was not there, to be fair.
But became part of the conversation.
She definitely was part of the conversation.
And Bannon and Megyn Kelly, others, so many
Tucker.
others. Certainly Tucker Carlson. So give us a sense. What did you say, and why did you say it? And why did you choose that moment to say it?
So the reason that I chose the moment to say it is that Candace Owens, who has some issues of her own, she has been saying since Charlie's death that there was effectively a conspiracy to kill him. She has implicated pretty much everybody, ranging from, believe it or not, French intelligence to the Israelis to various friends and family members, possibly, of Charlie in his murder.
Yeah.
And there have been an enormous number of people in the influencer space on the right who have gone along with this, who have massaged it, pretended not to notice it, tried to defend her, tried to pretend that it was an aspect of that questioning her was an aspect of free speech, which of course was a violation of free speech, rather, which of course it isn't. Criticism is not a violation of free speech. It's a form of free speech.
Thank you.
And so I got up on stage and I basically gave a speech saying our responsibility as people with influence in the public space, we have some responsibilities, and those responsibilities include truth above all.
Yeah.
We ought to be clear about what we believe. We should not hide the ball. We should not allow, quote unquote, friendship to trump what is true. Just because you're friends with someone does not alleviate the responsibility for you to say when they're doing something that is wrong or immoral. We should not engage in audience capture. Just because our audience wants us to say a thing doesn't mean that we ought to say it. And we ought to ensure that we are held responsible for the things that we say, and also the people that we have on.
These are moral suggestions and guidelines. They should never be laws, but it is a responsibility that I think that people like Ben Shapiro and others in the public space do have, but not to a strict, like obviously nothing to a legal standard, because we have to protect the First Amendment. So yeah, that's my
and
take.
How we question those people. So of course, anybody has the right to have anybody on their show who they want, and then they should treat those people how they want to treat.
These guidelines are put first in that priority list, truth. So that's what free speech is, why it's so important, is because truth matters.
Those people. I mean, if I were to have on somebody who's, in a deeply adversarial position, I think what's great about this conversation is you can see how adversarial we are with regard to some of our positions, but at the same time still have the discussion. Yeah. If you are going to have on, for example, as Tucker Carlson did, Nick Fuentes, who is a self-stated Nazi apologist, and then you're going to treat him with kid gloves, then you ought to be held responsible for that in the court of public opinion. And if we as influencers do not do that job, if we lie to you, if we fib to you, if we make predictions which we are then not held responsible for, if we hide behind, quote unquote, just asking questions, this is one of my bugaboos. I hate it. You hear this a lot in the influencer space, mostly on the right, but some on the left as well. This sort of, I'm not putting out a theory. I'm just asking questions. Well, there's a difference between seeking answers and just asking questions. Seeking answers, that's what questions are for. It's to get better information, more clarification. I should have a better idea after the question of the answer than I did before. Just asking questions is usually a guise for willful ignorance and for positing a theory without having to carry the responsibility for positing that theory. So if I say, I'm just asking questions about whether you have peculiar sexual proclivities. I don't have any evidence. I'm just asking the question. And then you say, well, where is that even coming from? Listen, I'm just asking questions. I'm not asking questions. I'm obviously attempting to impute something to you.
Yep.
That's that the problem with this, God, I wish he would just say it, is that it happens so much more in the mainstream fucking media. It happens so much more. Oh, CNN, CBS, ABC, NBC. We're talking about the most prolific violators of this principle. Tucker Carlson is just a drop in the bucket compared to them.
And so this was what this speech was about. I named names in it. I mentioned Tucker Carlson. I mentioned Megyn Kelly, who had sort of gone out of her way to massage Candace Owens in her pursuit of bizarre conspiracy theories about Erica and Charlie's murder.
Yeah.
I mentioned Steve because I think Steve has been doing many of the same things. And so that was the speech at AmFest.
And that you felt it was necessary to name names as opposed to imply. You just felt it was important to be
yes,
clear.
because I think that people should know exactly who they're listening to, particularly since they're going to hear from some of those people at the same event. And so I thought that people should, be forewarned about the people they're going to hear about. Then they can make their own decisions and determine whether my assessment of those personalities is accurate or inaccurate.
And the reaction was exactly as you anticipated.
I think that the reaction in the room was, I think, overwhelming because a lot of people were very upset that people had been saying this about Charlie's murder, which again was carried out by all available evidence by a person motivated by hatred of Charlie's position on transgender issues in particular. And all the evidence points to Tyler Robinson as being the person who shot Charlie Kirk. And so I think that a lot of people in the audience were deeply offended and upset, correctly so, at the kind of specious conspiracy.
It was obviously Tyler Robinson. Everybody fucking knows this. He was this trans loving apologist who got upset because his I can't say boyfriend, girlfriend, because it's like, what do you even call that? It friend, they friend, this is by its nature a relationship that Charlie Kirk doesn't approve of, and so he thought he had the right to kill him. I mean, to think that isn't sufficient motivation if you think that somebody you love is at risk or in danger because of somebody else's views, like Charlie Kirk's. And that the left isn't just in general insane and crazy with their woke progressive ideology that is detrimental and destructive by nature. Well, then you're mad. You've lost the plot, bro. You lost the plot. It's obviously enough. If it's enough for them to shoot Trump, it's enough for them to shoot Charlie Kirk. If it's enough for them to try to shoot the Israeli embassy staff officials, then it's enough to shoot Charlie Kirk. I mean, what the hell are we talking about here?
Conspiracy theories that have been promoted by this group of folks. The sort of blowback that came afterward was really interesting. There were a lot of people who obviously were very upset, and many of the people who I'd named, I'm not surprised, came back and fired back. I will say that I don't think any of them actually argued with the point that I was making. They seemed to make collateral attacks, imputing intent to me, suggesting that my speech had something to do with Israel, which is funny since I didn't mention Israel one time in the entire speech. And I found that sort of bizarre. And then obviously you've seen, sort of the influencer wars going on. But the whole point that I was making is here's a principle. Either you uphold the principle or you don't uphold the principle. If you don't uphold the principle, I'm going to call you out for not upholding the principle. And it really is quite simple. It's not about friendship. It's not about whether we go fishing together. None of that has anything to do with the principle that's at stake. Because if we want to have an honest discussion with one another, then we actually should be honest about the principles that we hold. And if we disagree, we disagree. But clarity before agreement, as my friend Dennis Prager says.
Were you close with Charlie?
I don't want to pretend that we were best friends or anything. Right. One of the things I said in the speech is I think that it's pretty rare, actually, in politics for people who say that they're friends in politics. These are usually not people you're going and hanging out with on the weekends. It's not real. Okay, whenever you hear politicians, oh, we're best friends. It's such bullshit. I'm
There are
sorry.
a
It's
few
just bullshit.
exceptions. There are a
Like,
few exceptions.
there may be a couple of exceptions.
Yeah.
They're rare.
That's
Okay.
fair point.
The reality is that they are business colleagues and associates in the same way that most people have business colleagues and associates that they see at the office. We see each other more rarely than you probably see your business colleagues or associates at the office.
You respected how he organized in the campus level. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
again,
Charlie
all
was-
the echoes of things you were doing.
Listen, Charlie was incredibly gifted as an organizer.
Yeah.
I won't say that we agreed on everything politically because clearly we didn't. But I think that Charlie as a person who was willing to go into fraught spaces, obviously, and he was killed doing this, and to speak his principles to people who disagreed and do so in what I think overwhelmingly was sort of an honest and decent fashion. I think that was a very good thing.
What Tucker Carlson and you history do you?
I mean, I'm not sure that we have a history so much as Tucker seems to object to my politics and I object to his. I think Tucker tries to personalize this. I think Megan has tried to personalize this. I don't believe in personalizing these things. I was asked by somebody, would Tucker and I ever be friends? I said, I'd go fishing with Tucker. I mean, I don't care. I mean, that doesn't matter to me. The question is his principles and the things that he says. I think that Tucker, I gave a speech right before TPUSA at Heritage Foundation where I pointed out that Tucker is not an advocate for conservatism in any way that I can identify conservatism. He's not in favor of a more limited government of checks and balances. He's come out in favor of feudalism fairly recently. He's not in favor of traditional institutions. He seems to think that they have lost their way. He's in favor of what appears to me a sort of horseshoe theory, Noam Chomsky foreign policy, where America is always the bad actor in the world. And so I think
I read my Chomsky back in the day.
Yeah, I
you'd
figured
not
you
be
would, yeah.
surprised.
And I think that when the biggest thing that Tucker engages in, I mentioned the just asking questions, which he's very fond of, is, and this is something again that is a both sides problem, and that is a general conspiracism about the world. The worst thing happening in our politics is a grievance-based politics that is being set up by actors on both sides, which basically says the failures in your life are generally speaking not your fault. You have no responsibility for them, and you need to shift the burden of your own responsibility over to systems. And so those systems could be the free market is responsible for your failures, or the systems of history are responsible for your failures. And listen, there are real conspiracies out there. They exist and usually can provide evidence for them. That's the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. But if your going theory is that the reason that you are lacking in life is because the most successful people in your society have rigged the system on their own behalf, and therefore they must be brought low in order for you to succeed, first you need to show me that that's actually evidentiarily the case. You can't just make that claim and then abdicate all responsibility for doing the right things in your own life. And the number one message that I constantly am trying to give to what I would now call young people, since I'm of the older generation now, and exactly is get off your ass and do the thing. I hear people complain, I can't get married. It's just so hard to get married, and no one can get married these days. Bullshit. I'm sorry, that's not true. You absolutely can find someone, and you absolutely can get married. Your grandparents were way poorer than you, and they got married and they had more kids. Hey, this is just nonsense. You are the richest, most privileged people in the history of the world living in the United States today, just relatively speaking. That doesn't mean everything's perfect, because I'm not comparing it to perfect. You can't compare anything in life to perfect. What you can say is that if you are sitting around in a country that has a GDP per capita among the highest on planet Earth, and open jobs, and the ability to move to those open jobs, and the ability to vote on your leaders and not get shot in the streets like people are getting shot in the streets in Iran, you should consider yourself pretty damned fortunate, and maybe you should start with what can I do to make my life better today before you figure that it's the system. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't problems with the system, and this is why I like these conversations, and we can get very...
Give me just 1 second, guys.
very specific about policy and how we fix a policy so as to make it easier. But I think that the American dream is You can make it. You can.
Okay, I'm
Right?
back.
Get government out of your way. Get everybody out of your way. Right? Let people succeed. And we do need, obviously, a functional social fabric, right? Which is why you've seen a lot of the institutions, like I would say churches, synagogues, break down. That social fabric breaking down is a massive problem because that's your safety net. When family breaks down, that's your supportive safety net for when things go wrong. We need to on a social level help restore all of that. But the desire by politicians to say I alone can fix, which is something President Trump said, but has also been said by now you've got Zohar Mamdani talking about the warm embrace of collectivism, which is insane, by the way.
Nature of campaigns, the campaign promises you made on day one.
Right.
On day one.
And also
end the Ukraine-Russian war.
Right.
Day one.
Or give me more power and I will solve the affordability crisis. Or give me more power and I will ensure that you have a good paying job and you can buy a house on a single income the way that your grandfather could in 1952. And I mean, first of all, let's just be real. The house your grandpa was buying in 1952, you wouldn't want to live in. They're kind of crappy. Okay, it was like a brick box in Detroit, and your grandpa was working on a Ford line riveting. Okay, now you're not. How many people are riveting today? The answer is none. The machines are doing the riveting, right? We should recognize the reality of our situation as opposed to creating either a false promise of utopia or a false utopian past that wasn't really existing in 1952. The reason we in the United States were able to survive on a one parent income.
Yep.
52
True.
paychecks versus 104.
It's because the entire rest of the world did not. It had been destroyed. Every place on Earth had been destroyed.
By the way, this does not make Gavin Newsom more palatable to me whatsoever. I want to just see Ben Shapiro blow Gavin Newsom away. And his ideas get in front of the Democrat base.
Destroyed as of 1952. The United States was basically left untouched in the homeland by World War II, and literally every place else had been destroyed. And so that was all an export market for the United States. So much so we had to prop up our export markets by doing things like the Marshall Plan so people would actually have money to buy things, right? And then it turns out that, by the 1960s, reality was setting in, and many of the union contracts that had been negotiated weren't sustainable, and we were being outcompeted by foreign sources. Let's just...
Yeah, Elrich.
Again, ignorance of sort of economic history and how people have actually lived throughout history leads to, I think on the right, a nostalgia for an economic time that didn't exist, and on the left, to a sort of utopianism about what is possible that is also not possible. And I think that we should start from a position in the United States of gratitude and duty and hard work and virtue and recognition that we live in a free country where the vast majority of decisions are your own. And then let's deal with the problems.
And you laid all this out in Lions and Scavengers in
All right, guys, we're gonna watch this because I've been looking forward to this for a long time. You know what? Actually, we're gonna save that. Yeah, it is 11:10 p.m. here, and I really should try to get some sleep tonight. So, when we come back, and I believe the earliest you can expect to see me again will be probably Sunday, and if not Sunday, then I'll gonna try to be live as much as I can all next week, Monday through Wednesday, probably all 3 days, and then next weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm going to be super active. Next weekend is a big one. We're going to be streaming hours and hours and hours. So, expect big content to come next weekend. And until then, my friends, stay safe. Hope you have a good weekend this weekend. And enjoy some time off if you don't.